Welcome to the first of our sessions on worship, the St. Olave's Lent course. In the Anglican tradition, liturgy or worship has tended to be a historical study. You look at texts and you look at how they have developed over the centuries. And sometimes it meant that people imagine that it's important to look backwards to a golden age and replicate it. The problem is no one quite agrees when that golden age was. If you go to All Saints North Street, for instance, it's an imitation of mid-19th century Italian Roman Catholic services. That's the golden age. Why? Because that's what they chose. Well, let's take a different approach and ask, instead of looking at texts, let's ask, what are we doing when we worship? And I'd like us to start with a story from 2 Kings. It's the story of the Aramean general Naaman and Elisha the prophet. Elisha has just healed Naaman from his leprosy, and Naaman proclaims his faith in Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, rather than Baal Rimmon. In Naaman's home of Damascus, Rimmon was the chief god, a god of thunder. So Naaman speaks to Elisha. Naaman says, "May the Lord pardon your servant on one count. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow down in the house of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant on this one count." He said to him, "Go in peace." Adherence to a god is seen as a very clear way. Having said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel," Naaman intellectually acknowledges Yahweh as the one God. But what happens when he goes with the king, his master, into the temple of Rimmon? As the king prostrates himself to this alternative God, so must Naaman. He doesn't mean it. He's only doing it for form's sake. But what matters in terms of worshipping is what you do physically. Worship in the scriptures means what you do with your body. If you Google worship on the internet, you will come across something entirely different. Most references and most adverts come from modern charismatic churches where the word worship, especially worship leader, it's to do with song. A worship leader leads the people in song or gets the people to listen to song. And this includes, of course, an important emotional response. It's about music. The worship leader leads the music. For churches which often stress the significance of the Bible, it's really odd that they ignore what the scriptures say that worship is. My experience of worshipping in the Eastern churches made me realize how important the body is in worship. In Syriac churches, people regularly prostrate themselves, putting their heads to the ground. In Lenten midday prayers, for instance, they say, "Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy," 40 times. And each time they say Kyrie eleison, they cross themselves, they go on their knees, put their head to the ground, and then stand up again. At the end of it, you really know you've been exercising. It's very physical. It is something that we have lost because Western society has become a "I think, therefore I am" society. So worship scripturally and in traditional societies is a physical thing. COVID has made us ask a lot of questions about worship. Before COVID, there were certain things that really mattered. Worship, for instance, has sets of rules. It always happens in a specific place and at a specific time. It has rules, it doesn't have an economic outcome in itself, and it has an uncertain end result. As it happens, these are also the rules for play. Chess or Monopoly, village cricket, they all share these things with worship. Of course, you can professionalize play so that instead of being participatory, it becomes a spectator event with an economic outcome. And I think that one way of assessing worship is whether it is participatory, as play, or economic, as an act of observing. So, what are we doing in public communal worship? When common worship came out in 2000, it pointed out that what we do first of all is we gather in a particular place. Now, what we've seen in this pandemic is very complex when it comes to that. In normal times, we go from home to church to gather to be the church. But are we now gathering, and are we there as passive or as active participants? So I'd like us to discuss, are we observers of worship in church or are we participants? Do our bodies matter? And how important is the location of worship? See you in the session.